What does sex have to do with Valentine's Day or any other holiday for that matter? Well, on today's special episode, you will find out. We sit down and talk to Dr. Elizabeth Grill, who's a fertility therapist, but also a sex therapist. And she will map out for you lots of ways to understand sex and fertility, sex and intimacy, and how to recalibrate your understanding of going through tough times and maintaining a healthy sexual life and good relationship. So tune in. Welcome to Building Your Family. This is a podcast about fertility treatment, donor conception, surrogacy, and all the ways the modern family is built. My name is Lisa Schubin. I'm your host. I'm an author, a researcher, a therapist, and I'm so excited today to share a special episode for Valentine's Day. We are bringing somebody special to you, but also special to me because she does so much for this world of fertility, but is also a dear friend and a colleague. I'm going to introduce you to Elizabeth Grill, but first, I want to tell you a little bit about her. So Dr. Grill is Director of Psychological Services at the Ronald O. Perlman and Claudia Cohen Center for Reproductive Medicine and is Associate Professor of Clinical Psychology in Obstetrics and Gynecology, Reproductive Medicine, and Psychiatry as well. She is also an assistant attending psychologist in New York Presbyterian Hospital, and she is the current chair of Resolve and just won the Night of Hope Award, which is kind of like the Oscars in our industry this year. She's also past president of the Mental Health Professional Group of the American Society for Reproductive Medicine and the past president of the Society for Sex Therapy and Research, which we will talk about today. She's an experienced counseling psychologist and co-owner of Ferticom, Fertistrong, the first digital apps developed to treat daily stressors faced by fertility patients. So thank you so much for attending tonight. We're very, very excited to introduce Dr. Elizabeth Grill. Thank you so much for coming, Liz.
Thank you. It's so good to be here. I love doing this with you.
It's wonderful. One more thing we can share together. And You're going to share with the audience, which I'm so grateful for because coming on to Valentine's Day, people have lots and lots of stressors. Of course, they have stressors every day with fertility treatment and trying to build their families. But, as we know, sex is one of the most important things that we can do as humans and part of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And yet, when we deal with fertility treatment, it's so hard to feel like sexual beings and to feel like we can have intimacy with our partners. So I'm so grateful that you can help us understand that a little bit. And we've prepared a few questions for you today. So the first question is, why does sex change when people are struggling to build a family?
Well, first of all, thanks for covering such an important topic for all the reasons that you mentioned, because I don't think it's talked about enough in our field. And I think there's a lot of shame around it, which leaves people feeling really helpless without places to go to have these kind of forums, to have open discussions. But the main reasons that you see are that sex shifts, right? The meaning around sex that is typically for pleasure becomes procreation, or for intimacy and love and connection becomes like work sex, or, sex as an expression of failure because there's so much loss and grief associated. As people go through, as you know, and as most of your listeners probably know, the distress levels for people going through infertility are just as high as for those being diagnosed with a terminal illness. And if you had a terminal illness, God forbid you had cancer, no one would expect you to have high levels of sexual desire and to be wanting to jump in bed with your partner every night. But for some reason, that doesn't transfer over, even though we know the distress levels are just as high. We don't see that compassion when it comes to sex and infertility patients because, for obvious reasons, it's tied to procreation. So people may feel less desire, may be depressed, may be anxious, but they don't have the luxury of putting sex aside when it comes to wanting to build a family, feeling as awful as they may be feeling. And the feelings, obviously, the sexual feelings, if you were to ask someone, like, make a list of 20 things that you think come to mind when you think of great sex, it's going to be like affection, warmth, connection, spontaneity, fun, intimacy. And then when you ask people to make a list of what comes to mind when you think of infertility, it's going to be like the opposite of all of that: loss, grief, helplessness, despair, shame, anxiety, failure. And so it's very obvious why these two things, don't mesh up and connect.
Yes, so true. Well, I know when I was going through fertility treatment, I really felt like my head and my body were in two different places. It's almost like I was cut off from my body. How do you help patients understand how to kind of integrate their body back into their everyday world, not to feel so disconnected from their bodies. As you're saying, this is so natural to feel upset and sad and depressed and all of that. And yet people still want to be able to feel connected to their partner.
I think they may have to separate it out. Sometimes, as you know, it's protective to have that dissociated feeling from like your body. And I think sometimes it's just too painful with all the poking and the prodding and the sense of failure and people, women waiting to get their period and feeling cramping. And if they're in treatment, doing shots and vaginal ultrasounds and getting blood work, that sometimes you have to disconnect to your body in order to get through it. I think communication is key as couples go through this to really talk about sex openly and talk about what's going on and maybe
Mm-hmm.
set aside some fertility free zones where you can say, okay, this is the area of the house that we're going to have procreative sex. Maybe this is the bedroom, and the couch is where we're going to have like connected sex, or maybe not even penetrative sex, but intimacy. We're going to give each other massages. So I think the way to connect back to your body during this period of time may be to separate from the procreative task of trying to build a family and just
Mm-hmm.
have areas where it's all about just getting in touch with, intimate touch again, or things that you used to do that you used to enjoy together, bringing date night back in. That may be the way to connect again around the body, but you may have to stay a little bit disconnected when you're going through the rest.
So actually to say, these are the places or times or experiences that we want to have that have nothing to do with procreation.
Right.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
great advice.
Yeah. And if you can afford it, like go to a hotel, for some people, I'll say really separate it out. If you could take a break from fertility, which most people don't want to do, but sometimes they have to, if they're
Mhm.
healing from something or if the clinic is closed down, go do a staycation in a hotel for a night, order in some room service, take a bath or shower together, or watch a good movie together, cuddle. If you want to try and have sex in those situations, great, but it has nothing to do with ovulation and nothing to do with fertility.
Right. And I'm sure that also brings a lot of joy back into your life, right? We underestimate how nice those experiences are.
Yeah, touch is important. And a lot of people don't want to be touched during this time for all the obvious reasons.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So the next question is, what are some typical myths that men and women have about sex?
I mean, I think there's a lot of them. I think the most
Mhm.
typical one for women is probably this sense that they're supposed to have, unlimited desire for their partners, right? So whenever their partner comes to them, they should be sort of wanting of them and be able to have this desire to be ready to go. And in fact, it's the same for men, this sense that men should be ready, willing, and able to go at the drop of a dime. So the woman's ovulating and the man should just be like able to get an erection and perform and ejaculate at all the right times and all the right places. And that doesn't
Mhm.
happen. And
Yeah.
creates a lot of performance anxiety for both partners, where a woman is feeling the pressure of ovulation and she has this really short window to make things happen, or she has to wait an entire month and she's not feeling any desire. In fact, she's feeling incredible anxiety and sadness and a sense of failure. And somehow she's supposed to get herself in the mood enough to be able to have sex. And it's the same for the man. He knows maybe his partner's home waiting, he's at work and he has to go home and be able to perform, or she's going to be really, really upset and he's going to let her down. And then they're going to have to wait a whole nother month. So I think those are probably two of the biggest myths and problems that we see with, trying to build a family, at least naturally, before people shift over
Mm.
to, reproductive medicine.
And so how do people explain that or talk to their partners about that? That I feel, I feel like objectified, or I feel this internal demand, or maybe the demand from my biological clock or whatever, that I have to just perform on demand, or and I don't feel like it. How do couples talk about those things?
I think first validating it. I mean, we know that like 40 to 60% of people going through infertility experience sexual dysfunction. That's really high. It's more than
Yeah,
half. And so I think that can help people feel calmer about it. Like, oh, so it's not just something that's wrong with me. Actually,
right.
more than half of the people experience what I'm experiencing. And then being able to just talk about it sometimes is enough to bring that connection back to couples and to have empathy, because you can imagine the avoidance that creeps in, right? You'll have the man who all of a sudden, when he knows it's the ovulation window, saying, oh, you know what, my boss has a late meeting I have to attend, or these partners are in town, I have to go out for drinks with them, or I have this unexpected business trip. And they'll start avoiding sex altogether, which just adds
Hmm.
to more resentment and anger and blame. the woman probably isn't going to be the one avoiding it, but she's going to be the one sort of pursuing it. And then there's this animosity that builds between the one pursuing and the one avoiding. And both people are angry at the other person, and it can create this huge divide. So I do think communication is the first step. Is just being able to say, like, hey, I know this fertile window is really important, but it puts too much pressure on me to perform. Sometimes outsourcing it to a reproductive clinic helps with this, separating, like, we're going to take our intimacy back and reclaim it, and we're going to outsource our procreation, right? So sometimes it gets easier when people move to the clinic. I think what gets harder is this sterile environment. It doesn't feel very, connected when someone's getting an insemination and the partner's not in the room and it's the nurse in the room. And it just can get very, very uncomfortable, at different levels. Or the doctor in the bedroom syndrome. You hear that a lot, where suddenly, everyone's in your business, right? You're like naked in front of everyone. Everyone knows what's going on. And so it's far, far, far from an intimate setting.
Right. You just don't feel sexy.
So there can be problems on both ends, but it does help some people when they outsource it and they can just get back to intimacy at home and reproduction in the center.
That's great. Because it's so true, right? That's not a sexy feeling, to feel like you're naked in front of everybody and everyone knows about your sex life and everybody is seeing your sperm or the inside of your body, and all of a sudden this thing that used to be romantic now all of a sudden feels so mechanical.
Yeah, and everything feels like work. I mean, in traditional sex therapy, take the infertility out of it, there's already this myth that if you are together for a long time, married for a long time, or together and dating, somehow it should always be like this magical experience. It should be spontaneous and exciting every single time. It's like the Hollywood version of our sex lives. And that's not true. And so it perpetuates this myth that if people are not experiencing that, they think something's wrong with them. Now you layer on top all the infertility stuff, and it's like, no one's talking about it. And so do you have to work, whether you're experiencing infertility or not, to maintain sexual intimacy in your relationship, in your marriage? It's not going to take care of itself. That is a complete myth. And I think once people can wrap their heads around the idea that planning something, whether it's sex during a non-fertile time of the month or, a vacation, it's still exciting, right? I always give the analogy, you put a lot of effort into planning a vacation, right? You have to book the flights and the hotels and the tours that you want to go on, and you have to envision what every day is going to be like. And once you get there, hopefully you still have a lot of fun, and it's far from spontaneous. It's a very planned out vacation. So when I use that analogy, people start to understand, like, oh, okay, so sex can still be fun and connected and intimate, even if it's like planned and we have to work at fitting it in, and we have to work about when we're going to fit it in and how we're going to fit it in, around fertile windows, non-fertile windows. So ignoring it's not going to work. A lot of people are like, well, when I get to the other end of the fertility thing, or when we finally have a baby, it'll all be okay. And that's not really the case. So you do have to apply some work and maintenance to make things okay, sexually and intimately.
Yes, yes. That's so important. Just on that note, I think it's so helpful for people to listen to this, because they really need to understand that, when you're first starting a romance, right, it's going to be very different than further along down the road. So when people are going through fertility treatment, do you see that they're able to adjust their expectations of even what feels pleasurable, or what they may want or what they may not want because of the invasive nature of the treatments?
No, I think people are lost to this. I just think there's no language for it. There's no normalization of it. And then there's no help for it. So I think people are suffering in silence. I think there's a lot of couples and individuals who carry a lot of shame. Sex is a hard thing to talk about anyway, in the healthiest of relationships. So when you're in a crisis mode of being diagnosed with infertility, this is like the last thing people feel equipped to talk about. They have a hard enough time talking about the infertility itself and the distress it's causing. So I think, therapy can really help with this, breaking the silence and just saying, look, I know this to your partner, I know this conversation's awkward, but I really, really think we need to sit down and just have this discussion. Here's what I'm feeling. What are you feeling? How can I make this better? Here's what I need from you. It's really, really, really key. It's awkward. It's uncomfortable. People aren't used to talking about these things.
It's so uncomfortable, but so important, as you're pointing out. Imagine your beautiful future. You're snuggling with your child. You feel so connected to them. Your friends and family are so happy, and you have everything that you've ever wanted. I want this for you too, but I want more than that. I want you to feel secure knowing that you've made the best decisions, not just short term, but long term for your future family. Wherever you are on your journey, whether you're choosing a donor, choosing a clinic, learning how to talk to your donor-conceived child about their origins, all of these decisions will have wider implications for your future. And I want you to have the right resources so you can feel empowered and confident at this very important time in your life. That's why I'm so excited to introduce you to Building Your Family. It's the only expert-guided platform designed for parents and parents-to-be using reproductive medicine. We provide unique strategies that you won't find anywhere else to make your path to parenthood smoother and more informed. And that's why our approach is about offering practical and actionable steps that you can use right now. Whether you're just starting out or already deep into your process, Building Your Family is here to guide you with expert advice, specialized education, stress reduction strategies, and a community to support you every step of the way. We can't wait to see you inside. Okay, so let's look at the next one. What are the most common sexual problems for couples going through infertility?
I mean, I think we've touched upon them. I think the number one is sex without desire. We know in the regular world of sexual medicine, taking out the infertility part, that desire you can get in the mood even if you're not in the mood. And I think this is the same, although a little bit more challenging, but to have a little bit more self-compassion and say, yeah, I mean, I'm going through a lot. I'm not in the mood to do this, but what are some things I can put in place to make this an experience that I don't want to use the word tolerable or enjoyable either, but like that is okay. That is a connected experience, even if it's a connection within the midst of this loss and
Right.
this feeling of, panic and anxiety and depression. How can we come together and make this a connected experience? And I do think that's possible, but also the self-compassion piece is really key. Like I said in the beginning, if you had a death, loss of a loved one, any other kind of disaster in your life, you wouldn't be expected to be thinking about sex. And so the pressure just of that concept, that in order for us to build a family, we need to have sex to do that if we're not, outsourcing it to the clinic, puts this in a really interesting category, right? Where it can't really be avoided the way you can sort of have more tolerance to avoid in other periods of stress or grief in your life. So I think that's tricky, because
Yeah.
even though depressive feelings and anxiety feelings predominate during this process, you don't get off the hook with saying, well, I'm putting sex on the shelf. Like, I'm just not going to think about it or do it. So it's a unique situation.
Yeah. And it almost sounds like that couples really need to think about prioritizing their connection over their sex life,
Yeah.
even though they feel like their sex life needs to be normal or to feel functional in the relationship. Their sex life should be a certain way. It's almost like they have to say, we might need to make these adjustments in our life together and prioritize our relationship.
Yeah, which may have already taken a hit given, at whatever process they're at in the fertility process, definitely.
Right. There may already be conflict in their communication, in their connection, in their value system.
Right. It may have to start with communication as sort of the place that connects again. Just empathy, basic empathy can
Yes.
reunite people.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so interesting. Okay. And what are some of the most common sexual complaints that people have?
I think performance anxiety for the men, definitely. The idea that having to demand, like be on demand, sex on demand, they feel like a stud service or a queen bee syndrome we often hear where they're only good for their sperm. They're
Mm,
only good to be able to provide what's necessary to fertilize their partner. And so they often feel tossed aside and forgotten, and that their partners don't want them or desire them anymore. And I think the performance anxiety is different for the women because it's more the pressure to make sure their partners can perform during the fertile window. And
mm.
so they're sort of like, putting any desire aside and saying, like, I just need to get this done. And if they don't have the cooperation on the other side, it can be infuriating to them with very little empathy. And so that's like a recipe for disaster.
That's so interesting. Yes.
Yeah.
And then what about how people can address some of these issues? How can they work on some of these issues? What would you say?
I mean, first and foremost, go see a gynecologist or a urologist. I mean, I'm always the person that will say we want to make sure to rule out any physiological organic problems that are going on because you just don't know.
Mhm.
So I would say first, if you're having, erectile dysfunction, ejaculation issues, desire problems, pain with sex, definitely go get that checked out to make sure that the doctors say everything looks okay. And then after that, I would say try on your own to communicate, see if you can, get conversations going, bring back date night, see if you can connect, make a list of all the things you used to love to do together before infertility happened and go back to some of those things. Maybe it's getting theater tickets or your favorite restaurant you used to go to or going away for a weekend. Bring some of that back and see if the connection can come back because it's hard to just jump in bed with someone that you're feeling resentful or angry toward, or if you feel like they don't have your back, they're not supporting you through the process, they don't understand what you're going through. So, connection is going to be key. So, see the doctors first, then communication and connection, then maybe bring back some joy and pleasure around the things that you used to love doing. And then, like I said before, setting some fertility free zones and see if that helps, really kind of splitting things apart. The bedroom is for procreation, the couch is for pleasure and joy. Sometimes mentally just changing the environment up like that can really help. If you're into it, if interest wanes, try erotic books, games, watch a movie that you think is
Mm.
sexy or sensual.
Mhm.
See if you can get yourself in the mood that way. Avoid sort of the ritualized mechanistic kind of sex because that can lead to all sorts of performance anxiety. And then sex therapists are available who really are great at helping people bridge the gap of communication. If it's just too uncomfortable to have these conversations with your partner, you just don't know where to begin, or you try to and it goes south and winds up in a fight or blaming each other, really seek out a mental health professional who's trained in sex therapy who can sit down and not only get you guys talking and empathizing with one another, but actually have a treatment plan of what you can do to start to build that bridge back to each other. And those techniques can be really helpful.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So, on that note, I'm wondering about this because when we talk about sex on demand and that sort of thing, we're talking about heterosexual couples, but of course, people who are, let's say, single or a gay couple, a gay or lesbian couple, they may also feel like their reproductive life is kind of mechanicalized and feeling very, very disconnected from their life. And so I think even with some of the people that I've seen who feel like this is just something that I'm going to have to do on my own and I'm having IUIs, or maybe it's a lesbian couple and they're just having maybe trying at home or having IUIs in the clinic and they're feeling not very sexy because all of a sudden my vagina is functional. It's not sexy. I'm not feeling really in the mood. And so I guess do some of the things that you're saying also apply to these other relationships?
Absolutely. All of them. Desire is desire, communication is communication. Those are like universal kind of things that when they break down, you start to see the breakdown in the relationship, no matter who you love and what kind of relationship you're in. I think for single people going through it, there's a whole host of other concerns that can come up because if they are dating or they're in relationships, sometimes having conversations about that can feel uncomfortable if they've just started a new relationship or they're dating. Do they bring this
Mhm.
up? Do they ignore it? Do they not bring it up? Do they take a break from dating? I think some of that comes up for them. Just negotiating those spaces could be a little bit different. But for people who are in partnerships, I think it's pretty universal, the desire piece, the avoidance, the feeling I'm just, being used, or the one who is in treatment, maybe getting poked and prodded is feeling like they're taking the burden of treatment and the other partner's getting off the hook and not feeling the burden. So, I think some of these things are pretty universal.
And so if they're feeling like it's very mechanical or they're feeling like I'm feeling disconnected from my partner because my partner is going through all the treatment and I'm not, and I feel badly about that, or I'm the other person and I'm going through all the treatment and that person isn't. And now all of a sudden, this is kind of trickling down to our sex life where we're, first of all, feeling very separate about these issues and having lots of feelings about them. But now we're not feeling as loving or amorous or interested in connecting. How do people start to bridge that gap for themselves again when maybe the rules are different now, right? Because now all of a sudden, maybe the best somebody can do is kiss somebody goodnight or say, I'm okay, I'll hold your hand. And this is not the way that things were historically in the relationship.
Well, I think that's where the communication comes in. If someone's saying this is all I have to give right now, I don't want my body to be touched. I feel like the hormones are making me feel uncomfortable or I feel bloated and I just don't want my body touched. Then I think those are the kinds of negotiations that need to take place. If it's
Hmm.
just about like, I don't want to have traditional sex, but I'm okay with a massage, then maybe it's a massage. Maybe you take a shower together. I think there's still ways to stay intimate and close sensually and sexually that don't necessarily have to be complete, sexual engagement, right? Or erotic engagement. So I think really being honest with yourself and communicating that to your partner, which can be really hard for people, I think is key because there's plenty of things people can do to connect them in the relationship that's non-sexual, right? Like we talked about just doing the things you like to do together, taking a walk together, going to a restaurant together,
Hmm.
that just help the connection stay intact because I think everything can break down very quickly. But then also saying, I think it's important for us to stay connected physically. Here's what I think I'm able to do right now, and here's what is off limits. I think setting those boundaries can be really helpful, both for the person pursuing and the person avoiding. Because I think once you lay it out clearly, you don't have that kind of cat and mouse frustration that you can see with the chase going on and someone always having to say no, no, no. And then the
Hmm.
other person feels constantly rejected and feels badly about themselves. So that can build up and, take its own energy in the relationship and create a lot of negativity. So I think breaking that down can really help.
And then once they have discussed this, what if one person says, well, I don't really feel like it. I'm so annoyed with my partner because I'm the person who deals with all this treatment, or I'm cramping, or I don't want to be touched and I can't tolerate it anymore. And they really are not seeing kind of the big picture of the relationship because there's this gap between them and they can't bridge it.
I mean, oftentimes there's underlying issues in the relationship itself that may have to get unpacked first before you can even talk about, the negotiating of intimacy.
Hmm.
So if it's that the person's not feeling supported, I'm calling the insurance company and I'm the one who has to go to the appointments and I'm the one who has to take the shots and you're just off in the world at work like nothing's happening, then you start to negotiate the balance there of burden, like, okay, I want you to come to every appointment with me. I want you to give me the shots. I want you to be in charge of calling the insurance companies because I'm the one that has to wake up early and go to the clinic every morning. Once you start to kind of divvy that up a little bit, you will start to see things equalize where the person feels supported.
Mm,
Or another area of contention I often see with couples is that one person wants to talk about it all the time and the other person doesn't want to talk about it at all. And
right.
so the one person wants to say like every detail of what happened to them in the clinic and how they're feeling and who they talked to during the day about it and what the next plan is. And the other person's like, you know what, I've had a long day. I don't want to hear about it. Just give me the highlights. So negotiating that communication pattern can really help too. Either setting time aside once a week, whether it's like a Sunday morning, we're going to spend 2 hours over coffee talking about every aspect of what happened fertility wise during the week and what's coming in the future. Or we're going to set a timer and 10 minutes a night. We're going to check in and just talk about it. And it's different for every couple, what their preferences are. That can really help. It can help the
Yeah.
person who feels like they need to be heard. And it can help the person that shuts down every time their partner starts to speak. If they know, like, it's capped, right? We have 10 minutes, then the
Hmm.
listener can really listen with their whole heart and mind and the person who's trying to talk can really feel understood. Sometimes solving these underlying issues can automatically make the intimacy happen again because the
Mm.
empathy and the closeness comes back once these other things are sorted out.
Yes, that makes perfect sense because if you are feeling more connected and more appreciated, then maybe you can open the door to more amorous feelings,
Exactly.
right?
Right.
So it sounds like a lot of what you're saying today is that the communication and the compassion for each other, and also being flexible to maybe change the way that you approach each other. Maybe you feel like this is a way we have sex or this is a way we communicate, maybe has to change.
Yeah. People like are raised to think there's only one way to do things when it comes to intimacy and sexuality. And all of a sudden they see a sex therapist and you're laying out all these different suggestions and ideas. And then you try them and they're actually fun and connected. And it can open up a whole nother world of, touch and playfulness and flirting and
Mm.
enjoying each other again, rather than this feeling of like, okay, everything has to be done in one, specific way.
For everybody out there, I think that's a very hopeful note to start to wind down on. But before we end, are there any other tips that you would like to share with our viewers since we're heading into Valentine's Day? I know this is a very sensitive topic for a lot of people. A lot of people don't care about Valentine's Day, but some people have a lot of expectations around it.
Plan ahead and vocalize what the expectation is. There's nothing worse than having expectations disappointed. So don't sit there expecting. I mean, there's so many times I talk to couples, right? And they're like, oh, I just wanted, I wanted to have a quiet cup of tea with my partner in front of the fire. And he brought me flowers and I didn't want flowers, right? And then there's another person's like, I just want a dozen roses and some chocolate. And then the person comes with tea, right? So
Hmm.
you just have to say, this Valentine's Day in particular, while we're going through so much, let's plan how we're going to celebrate. Are we going out to dinner? Are we staying in? Are we making dinner? Are we ordering in? Are we exchanging gifts and cards? Are we not? If we are, here's what I would love. And I know,
Hmm.
again, it's that feeling of like taking away the spontaneity and surprise. But remember, you still have fun when you go on vacation. You could still have a fun Valentine's Day if you set the expectations. And for some people, by the way, that may mean no sex. I want to cuddle on the couch and watch a movie. Right. So I
Hmm.
think the expectations of somehow my partner expects, me to bring them flowers and then I expect to find them in the new lingerie I had sent to the house, and that you can see how that can be an explosive disaster, for people if they're in the middle of treatment and no one's in the mood and no one has desire. So yeah, there's a lot of expectations around these holidays. Like you said, some people care, some people don't. I would just have the conversation and have the plan.
Mm.
Planning things when you go through infertility is key. Really having, if it's planning when the call's going to come with pregnancy results and who's going to be in the
Yes.
room, and planning your holidays and anniversary dates that can be painful, memories, like planning is really important.
Yes. So important for communication and so important to be able to plan what you want to do with regard to your treatment and what you want to do with regard to your life, talking to friends and family about it, and all of those things are so vitally important. And I think this whole thing about planning and talking about it that you're bringing up is so really crucial because people don't often think that one day they're going to kind of have to map out their life, right? Everybody wants to feel this kind of romantic idea that somebody's going to come in on a horse and sweep them off their feet and give them everything that they've always dreamed of as a child. And if your partner can fulfill some of those things in the beginning of the relationship, it's kind of shocking when all of a sudden that changes, right? In the middle of the relationship, you have infertility problems and things start to change. So now to start to adjust your ideas about what the relationship's going to look forward to can be disappointing to people, but it doesn't have to be.
No, and you can ask for what you need. You can say, hey, when we first met, this stuff you used to do, I found so exciting and so charming. And I feel like we haven't done that anymore. It'd be great to bring that back. What did I used to do for you that you found, exciting or fun?
Mhm.
And just because you explore things in conversation doesn't mean you're committing to doing any of them, right? It's just a conversation where then people can say, yeah, I don't think I could do that anymore. But you know what used to be really fun when we did this? And you can bring back the stuff that feels right. You can bring back new stuff that you've never tried. And then
Mhm.
you can let go of some of the honeymoon phase of relationships that maybe you just can't reenact or bring back.
Yeah. So you have to kind of recalibrate your ideas of what the relationship can look like in the service of your relationship, really.
Yeah, very, very important. And I do think the sex stuff is just buried. I think people are so uncomfortable bringing it up. They don't know what to do with it when they bring it up, that it's one of the first things I think that gets swept under the rug.
Yes. And then after it gets swept under the rug a lot, then all of a sudden it starts to submerge in other areas of the relationship, I would imagine.
Right. And that myth of like, oh, it'll all be better when we're through this chapter of our lives isn't necessarily the case.
And what usually happens when people do that?
Well, I'll say if you're having any sexual intimacy issues leading into the infertility, those will follow you, if not become worse, through
Mhm.
as you go and through the end. I mean, the good news is that most of the sexual dysfunction is transient as people go through this. So I think some of it will sort of repair itself. But depending on how long and how much damage is done, you have to get back to working on it. It's not just going to magically, like, you're going to look at each other in the kitchen one day and be like, oh my gosh, I have forgotten all of the,
Mm.
angry and horrible things that happened during this process. And now I'm ready to just like jump back in bed with you. That does not happen. And of course, if you're lucky enough to move on to have a child, that has its own host of, sexual issues with the sleep deprivation and,
Oh, yes.
healing from delivery and whatnot. And, the scars from infertility don't go away, they change, but, people do carry that with them into the future. So any kind of, animosity that grew from the sexual stuff that was happening is unfortunately going to come with you. But the good news is, like, it's easily repairable, right? These aren't sort of lifelong things that you have to carry with you if you get the help you need.
Right. That's so important to know. And that I think also, and I would imagine you see this all the time, that just because you have these difficulties or just because you have to recalibrate what you think about the relationship or change things, just because that's true doesn't mean you don't love each other. Doesn't mean that you don't care about how the other person feels.
Yeah, I mean, the empathy comes first. Like I said, it all starts with communication and empathy. Everything else flows from there. If you don't have that, it's really tough to sort of bring back desire and to perform, and all those things break down.
Well, that is so wise. Thank you so much for sharing all of this great.
Pleasure.
Oh, it's fantastic. And I hope all of you out there really tuned in and listened to all of this wonderful information. I hope it helps you. And thank you so much for coming. Where can we reach you?
You can reach out to me at my email. If you go to ivf.org, which is where I work at Cornell,
Okay.
you'll see my email there. It's eag2001@med.cornell.edu.
Okay. Any social media handles you'd like people to follow?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram, Dr. Liz Grill. I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok. So you can find me there sharing content and videos and sexual tips like these. So feel free to follow me there as well.
Great. So I hope all of you do, because Dr. Grill has a wealth of information, as you've just seen. So please search her out and get the help that you need. Please don't just throw your relationship out, because it is so valuable to keep your relationship solid during these really trying times. You can absolutely do it, as you can see here. So thanks so much for coming, and please come back next week.
Thank you.
Hi, it's Lisa Schumann. I hope that you enjoyed that video, and I hope it helped you. And if it did, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe, because that's how we keep going. It's really important to us. And if you liked it, you might like this one.